Good morning. It's good to see everyone here, and I know you all enjoyed your time together in Sunday school this morning, trying to get things back on track and get back into kind of a routine. So I know some of you may have been rubbing your eyes a little bit more this morning. We are still in the Gospel of Mark, and move this microphone. This morning, probably this is going to feel like too many sermons, I would say, but as we look in Mark's Gospel, and really anytime we read Scripture, there's two questions that we want to ask. The first one is, what did this mean then for those people? So in the historical and literal context, for those people in that day, what's being said about their situation and where they're at and what they're going through. And then, after discovering and seeing that, then we can ask the second question, and that's, what does that mean for us today? What does that mean for us in our culture, in our society, in the context that we live in? And so this is a really familiar passage for you if you grew up in church. We're looking at this widow that gives what's known as the widow's mites in the temple. And as I was reading and studying this week, the thought crossed my mind that most of the time when pastors, when we hear people teach or speak on this passage, this widow is often held up as this example that you and I are to emulate, that we're to model our lives after, model our giving after. And so people will say things like, well, we look at this passage, we look at what this widow has done, and this tells us that we should give sacrificially because this widow has given all that she has. And so people will say things like, well, we need to give until it hurts. Or people will look at this and say, well, we need to give a certain percentage of our money. And really, if you make that argument when you come away from this, you have to say, well, that's 100%. But people will say we need to give sacrificially. Others would say that this shows that our confidence in God should outweigh our competence. So our trust in God and what He provides should outweigh our ability to give, and we should actually be willing to trust God and be able to trust God and give more than we're prepared to give, because God will provide our needs. He'll bless us. A lot of people that preach a prosperity gospel use this passage to say, see, you need to give more, you need to give like this widow, and God is going to bless you. After all, she's giving out of her poverty, she's giving out of her lack, and we should be able to do that too. And then a third way people look at this is that in our giving, our attitude is more important than the amount that we give. And so they look at this and say, well, two mites was not a lot of money in that day. And so they will often contrast the religious leaders and their hypocrisy and their kind of showmanship in their religion with the humility of this widow. And we do that because we often assume that since this widow is poor, since she is living in poverty, then she is humble. That it's a sign of her humility. And so we will say that her poverty is kind of this allegorical illustration of that humility, that her poverty represents her humility. But as we have been reading through Mark, and as we have been seeing what Jesus is doing in the temple, the question that we need to ask and look at this morning is, what if her poverty represents her poverty? And it's not symbolic of her humility, but it shows that she was giving all she had to live on. And we're missing something very obvious. What if in this text there isn't a lesson, but there's a lament from Jesus as he's in the temple and he sees this lady? Because Jesus doesn't commend this woman. And if she was to be an example, as we've seen in Mark, we would kind of expect him to say, this is what you need to do. That he would say something like, when he teaches the parable of the Good Samaritan, and they ask, who is my neighbor? And he gives this parable of the Good Samaritan. He ends that by saying, go and do likewise. Do as this person did that showed kindness to the Samaritan. That's your example. That's what you need to live your life like. Or when he heals the centurion's servant, when he comes up to him and he says, I need you to heal my servant. He's sick. And Jesus says, well, let's go see him. And he says, no, I have men. I'm a man of authority, and I have men under my authority, and I know that you have authority, and if you just say the word, he'll be healed. And Jesus says, wow, I've never seen such faith. He's healed. And he shows us that this faith is something that we need to imitate, that is something that we need to have in our lives. Or even before this story, if you've noticed, we're kind of speeding up through Mark a little bit, and we're skipping a little bit. But not too long in the temple, someone approached Jesus and they said, which is the greatest commandment? And he says, well, what do you think? And he says, well, I think loving God and loving our neighbor. And he says, you're not far from the kingdom of God. You're on the right track. This is something that you need to pay attention to. This is a lesson that you need to learn. You're on the right track. But what if, when we look at this widow's story, if we've been seeing her as a hero, and she's really the victim? And so if we set the scene again in Mark, where we have been talking about Jesus' last week. It starts in Mark 11. And so what we're seeing is in this last week, as Jesus is heading to the cross toward the weekend, that he spends a lot of time in the temple. And so we talked a few weeks ago about how as he went into the temple and then went back to Bethany, he came back the next day and he saw the fig tree with the disciples, and it looked full, and it had a lot of leaves on it, and it was showing signs that there should be some fruit, even if it was the small pegum. But he sees no fruit, and so he goes in, and that's what he's seeing in the temple, is that these people are supposed to be bearing fruit, and they're not bearing any fruit. We see that he enters then into this series of debates that he has with people, and some of those are questions of who has authority, what should be the ultimate authority in our lives. We see people challenge the idea of eternal life and life after death. Then we also see them questioning man's purpose. What's our purpose? What's the greatest commandment? What is the goal of our lives? But the thing that is clear in Mark is that Jesus has come to judge what has become of Israel's religious system. That's the theme here in Jesus' final week, that he is going into this temple. So again, they were supposed to bear fruit. They were supposed to love the Gentiles and point them to God. They were supposed to welcome them in and point them to the Creator. And we see that they've turned the court of the Gentiles into this kind of a cattle sale or a strip mall. And so he talks about them being a den of robbers. They were supposed to love and care for the poor and the unfortunate, and he sees the people that are exchanging money, taking advantage of people. The exchange rates are inflated. What they're selling the sacrifices for has been inflated. And so they're taking advantage of people. And we've said for the past few weeks that they're actually being a barrier to God instead of a bridge to God. And so externally they were righteous. They looked like they had their act together. There was a lot of rituals and different things that they did to put on a show and look righteous, but internally they're corrupt. They have problems of the heart. And really, if we look at what Jesus is doing here, if you go back to Genesis, guys, it's really reminiscent of when God comes down and He talks to Abraham and He says, listen, I'm going to destroy Sodom. And Abraham says, God, will you destroy it for 50 righteous men? He says, no, not for 50 righteous. He says, he keeps going down. He says, well, what about if you can find 40 that are righteous? He says, no, and he works his own way. He works his way down to 20. But Jesus is observing for Himself what is going on in the temple, what is going on in the house of God. And He's building a case. And He's been laying out all of these details, and He's been observing. And in the parallel gospel accounts of this, what Trevor is going to read here in a minute is rather short when he talks about beware of the scribes. And there's just a short judgment that Jesus gives. But in the parallel gospel accounts, guys, this is when Jesus in the book of Matthew is going to give the 7 woes to the scribes and to the Pharisees. And just to kind of paraphrase what He says, what's found in Matthew 23, he says, woe, you're judged, you're condemned, because not only have you rejected God, but you're an obstacle to those that are searching for God. He says you shut the door in their faces. He goes on to say you really don't want people to honor God. What you want is for people to honor you. And He talks about them going to great distances, traveling across the sea to make a proselyte, to convert someone to Judaism. But what they're really wanting is someone to really look at what they've done, not what God has done. He says you boast about what you can do for God, what you have given, what you have built, what you have accomplished, but you forget what God has done for you. He says your religion, it's all external. It's all fluff. You neglect justice and mercy. So you may look righteous externally on the outside. He says you're like whitewashed tombs. So you look like everything's in order, everything's clean. It's actually maybe attractive, but on the inside is this rotting, decaying corpse. It's rotten to the core. He says you pretend to respect the law and the prophets, but your lives say otherwise. And so Mark's version is much shorter than that, but that's what parallels to what we read in Matthew. And Jesus is presenting His case to these people. And so he brings them to court. He brings them to trial, right? And everybody knows in trials you need evidence, and the testimony of someone is great. You want some eyewitness account. You want someone to kind of say what happened. But if you can provide a photo, if you can provide like an audio recording or video evidence of a crime that has happened, and you catch someone red-handed, I looked that up. If you didn't know, they think it's from Scotland, where poachers would go out and they would kill animals. And so when the law enforcement would go out and find people that had been poaching animals and they still had the blood on their hands, they would say, you've been caught red-handed. Or we may say, you've been caught with your hand in the cookie jar. But they're caught in the act. And that far outweighs a lot of times someone's testimony or the words that they speak. And so Jesus, as He has pronounced these 7 woes against the scribes and the Pharisees and this whole religious system that has been corrupted by man, He sits down across from the treasury, and this widow comes in. Come on up here, treasurer. This widow is Exhibit A. And that's how we need to see this morning as he reads.
In his teaching, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and like greetings in the marketplace and have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in two small copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, "Truly, I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." And as he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down."
If you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about what was going on in the temple, and the idea had become that the more you gave, the closer you could get to God, or the greater chance that God would accept you, and really gave the example of it's kind of like going to a concert. And so you may pay so much to go into the nosebleed section. You can pay a little bit more, and you can have maybe floor seats. You can pay even more than that, and you may get into like the orchestra box, or get front row passes, seats, and then you can pay even more, and you get this VIP pass, and maybe you even get to meet the person that is doing the concert. And again, that's what they were doing at the temple. The religious system had been corrupted by selfishness and greed, by a desire for control and power and notoriety. And so this is not only seen in these leaders, but just as we've been through Mark, we've seen this, right? Because even individuals that weren't a priest or a Levite, like you and I, were corrupted by this. And so people would say, well, I have this estate, I have this large amount of money, and my parents are getting older, and I know it's my responsibility to take care of them and to help them out, to take care of those that need things, but this gift is Corban. And so they had this tradition where they would say, this is Corban, it's a gift to God. And so I can't use this to take care of my parents because it's promised to God. But what would happen is they could use it for their own means. It wasn't necessarily just set aside for the temple. They could get into it if they needed to, but they refused to use it to take care of their parents. These religious leaders, as Trevor read in Mark, they consumed widows' houses. And what's going on here is the priests didn't have an income. They were dependent on the people and the offerings that people gave to God. And so what happened in this society is they became these positions of prestige. And it was an honor to have one to come to your house for a meal. And so you would invite them to come to your house to eat, and you would give them this nice place to sit and kind of display them to your guests as they came to eat at your house. And it was like, yeah, I've got the priest here. Look at me. Look at how I'm living. I've brought the priest in to my house. And you would kind of display them. And the priest would take advantage of that. Not only would they go to these meals and go to these people's houses, but they would literally devour widows' houses. Because as they fixed meals, they would say, you know, I need some food, and maybe they would invite them over, and it wouldn't just be, you know, what everybody else was eating. It's not like pintos and cornbread. They wanted filet mignon. And so they would literally devour the incomes of these widows that had nothing. And not only that, but they also served in legal positions. And so they were kind of estate managers, right? And so when a lady's husband would pass away, the priest could come in and say, okay, we're going to take care of your house for you. We're going to manage your estate affairs. We'll take care of that for you. And so what they would do is they would let her have some money, but they would skim off the top. They would embezzle money from these widows, and they were devouring their houses. And even in the temple treasury, in the offering, this would be kind of what Jesus is referring to about the temple treasury. In the court of women, there were 13 offering boxes that were boxes that had shofar horns on them. And so they were there for them to give money to go towards the upkeep of the temple. You have to repair buildings. You have to, there's upkeep involved with a building. But also at this time specifically, if you recall, Herod has been expanding the temple. And he's still building and adding on to the temple, and he wants to make it this glorious, beautiful sight because he wants the Herodian line to continue. And he actually is doing this because he wants people to think that he is the Messiah. Because the Messiah in the Old Testament was going to restore the temple, right? And so Herod is latching onto this, and he's saying, well, we're going to build this up, we're going to make it nice, and I want people to think I'm the Messiah. And so he does all these expansion projects to try to make the temple look nice. And as you heard in Mark, as they leave, even as they're leaving the temple, one of the people that are with Jesus is like, man, look at these stones. Look at the detail. Look how beautiful this building is. Look at what's becoming of this place. But the other thing that this was supposed to go to is for the economic support to help the poor, to help the widows, to help the orphans. Giving in the Old Testament, through Old Testament law, it was a tangible, visible means of loving God and loving your neighbor. And when God establishes the tithe, there are 3 different tithes that Israel would have tithed to God and the Levitical priesthood. But they also had a tithe that they would use for festival celebrations. And then the third tithe was a tithe that was to go to care for the people that didn't have jobs, didn't have incomes, widows and orphans, and even strangers that would come into their land. God commanded them to take care of those people. And so that's what part of this money was supposed to go towards. In Deuteronomy 15:11, this is why God commands that. It says, "For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land." And so they didn't mind opening their hand, but what they were doing was opening their hand to take, not to give. And so here is this poor widow. And Jesus says she's given all that she has to live on. When the wealthy would put their offering into these shofar offering boxes, you could actually hear the amount that they were putting in. You could hear like what size the coin was, what metal it was made out of, and you could kind of tell. Are they putting in a lot, or are they putting in a little bit? It was kind of like if you take, I was going to bring one this morning, but I didn't. But if you bounce a silver dollar, if I was to bounce a silver dollar off of this podium versus a quarter, they're going to sound different. And so that's what I'm talking about. And actually, when Jesus is saying, when you give, don't sound the trumpets as they do in the synagogue, this is what he's talking about. Because these shofars were horns, they're trumpets. And as people would drop their money in, people could hear. And so the idea was, I'm going to drop this in and let people hear how much I'm giving to God. And so people would listen and they would say, wow, they're really righteous. God's really going to bless them. Look at how much they have given. They've bought that VIP backstage pass. And here this widow, what she gives, it's not a lot. We talked about the denarius a couple weeks ago and about how that was about $50. It was around a day's wage. 2 widow's mites would have been equivalent to about 50 cents if we were kind of to modernize that. So she put in 2 quarters into this offering plate. But it says that it's everything that she has. And again, Jesus doesn't commend her, guys. He's just observing what is going on here, and it's a judgment. He's come into this temple to judge them. It's a lament because she is the victim of this corrupted system that says that the more you give everything. This is how you get to God. You have to buy your way in. You have to earn it. You have to work for it. And only then will God accept you. And again, it's bondage. It's a burden. And it cost this lady everything that she had to live on. And when Jesus comes out of the temple and the guy says, look at this building. Look at these stones. Look how much work and craftsmanship, and look how nice all of this is. And Jesus says, it's all coming down. There's not going to be a stone left, one on top of the other. It's coming down. God has had enough. Here's the thing, guys. This woman has given everything, and Jesus sees this. And it breaks his heart because these people were supposed to be caring for the widow and the orphan. They were supposed to be a light, bringing people to God, and they were supposed to be this bridge, and here they are as this obstacle. And here they are taking advantage of people at their lowest points in life. And Jesus sees this widow giving everything, and it's like inside he's saying, no, you don't give everything. I will give everything. It's not what you give, it's going to be what I give for you. And guys, there's freedom in that. There's so much freedom in knowing that we don't have to earn and work our way into heaven. That it's not something that we have to work for, but it's a gift that we receive. It's a gift that He purchased. And guys, when we think about sanctification, a lot of people have this idea that to be a Christian, you have to change immediately, that everything in your life is going to change, that you're going to be a completely different person from the get-go. That we have to work our way into this identity to be accepted. And that's not what salvation is. Salvation is God gives us a new identity in Jesus. And then He slowly starts to change us, gradually starts to change us, and we fall into that image. And we become more like Him. And we need to believe that. Because I don't know about you, but there are days I really mess things up. And it's easy to have doubts and worries and concerns, and we need to know that this is a process, that this is a journey that we're on, and we're becoming transformed into the image of Jesus. And that's where the freedom's at. That's where it's at, because I don't have to worry if I'm good enough. You don't have to worry if you're good enough, because Jesus was good enough for you. Amen. You don't have to worry about earning your way in. Wondering if you've been accepted because Jesus has given everything for you. I thought about the song Amazing Love. It says, I'm forgiven because He was forsaken, and I'm accepted because He was condemned. Guys, He gave all, so we don't have to. He paid the debt. He paid the price in our place. I said this is going to be like too many sermons. So we see this is a lament from Jesus. Let me read that again. When he sits down opposite the treasury and he watches, and many people put in large sums, and a poor widow came in and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and he said, truly, I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all of those who are contributing to the offering box. They contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had. All she had to live on. This is a lament. And Jesus He can't believe how we can corrupt what He intends to be good. And guys, we can mess it up so bad. We can. And historically, churches have done that often. We've messed it up. He's made it something so simple. We want to make it so hard. We want to heap up burdens on people. And it's so simple. But there is another lesson that still remains. Not only do we identify with this widow and be free from works-based righteousness, trying to earn our way into heaven, but we can also consider what is our responsibility to care for the poor and for the widow and those that are less fortunate. And God has a lot to say about our money. And Jesus, if you look at what Jesus says in the Gospels, actually about 25% of His time is spent talking about money. It's really important to God. We have a lot we need to think about and consider concerning our money. And it kind of ties in. It's really cool how it ties in. We've just been flowing. But last week, Cadence read, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Our very being is His. Our life is His. Our money is His. Our money is a trust. If you know what a trust fund is, I was thinking we're stewards of what God has blessed us with. And so like Corbin, when he will go to town sometimes, and I'm at the house, he'll say, can I borrow your debit card? Because I don't carry cash. But he'll say, can I borrow your debit card? And I'll give that to him. And so while he has that, he's using mine and Amanda's money. He's using our money. And so God has created this universe, and our lives are like these debit cards where we're using what He has given us. Because it all belongs to Him, but He graciously lets us partake and participate and use what He has blessed us with. And so we want to be wise and responsible stewards of His money. And so when Corbin leaves, I'll say, don't buy a bunch of garbage. Don't buy stuff you don't need. Use it wisely. And so it's the same thing for us. We want to be good and responsible stewards. We want to remember as Christians that we have been blessed so we can bless other people. Isaiah 58:10 says, feed the hungry and help those in trouble, then your light will shine out from the darkness. And the darkness around you will be as bright as noon. And so money is a tool. Not only can we bless others and tangibly demonstrate the love of God? We talk about being the hands and feet of Jesus, but our generosity and our giving is also tied to our worship. And so part of the point of the offering in the Old Testament, when they had the wave and the heave offerings, I don't know if you know this or not, but when they're talking about the wave and heave offerings, the wave offering they would hold up before the altar and they would wave it here. back and forth, and the heave offering that they would go up and down, and it makes a cross, right? And so this whole offering system that they have in the Old Testament, all of that symbolizes fellowship and communion and relationship with God. And so when they would sacrifice the animals, they would eat that because it represented that they were sharing a meal with their Creator, that they were participating in fellowship, that they were worshiping Him, that relationship was important to them. So even with us, it's our giving. It's part of our worship. In the New Testament, we see similar language. And Paul, when he is writing in Philippians, he says, I've received full payment and more, and I'm well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. And Paul says, you know, this money, it really helped me, and it's used to advance and spread the gospel, but this is not just pleasing to me and beneficial to me, it's pleasing to God. It's part of our fellowship and our worship to God. And then lastly, money is a tell. If, I know we're Baptist and we don't play poker, but if you've played poker, a tell is when you've got your hand and you're sitting across from somebody, and you know, maybe every time they have a good hand, they're adjusting their glasses, or they shift their cards, and you can tell that they always put their good cards. We do this in Uno, and I'm horrible at it. Amanda always knows, you know, where my draw 4 card is, and where I'm holding on to that. But a tell is you're giving away some information that you're trying to hide, right? And Jesus, when He talks about money in Matthew 6:19, He says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So money is a tell. It tells where our heart is. It tells us what we're really pursuing. And the fact of the matter is we will either worship with our money, or we will worship money. And Jesus also says you can't serve both God and mammon. You can't serve God and the material things and the money and the things that we often pursue instead of God. And He says, don't store up for yourself treasures on earth, but lay up treasures in heaven. And His point is, guys, our life is, if you're familiar with, I'm going to use a geometry term, Amanda, and correct me if I'm wrong. Our life, don't worry, she will. No, our life is a ray, right? And so there's this point, and then there's this line that just keeps on going forever. Is that's a ray? I remember math, some of it, until you get to the numbers part. But our life is this point, and then from there it's eternally a line. We're eternal beings. We have eternity in front of us, and what Jesus is saying here, guys, is don't live here in this point. A lot of times we focus on the point because that's kind of like our life right now. But in the grand scheme of things, that's minute. It's minuscule. It's the eternity that we have in front of us, waiting for us. And Jesus' whole point is don't live for this now, but be thinking about eternity. Have an eternity on your mind. And it's kind of like if you travel, you go to a hotel room. You might get a hotel for a week or 2 weeks if you're going somewhere. But we don't pack our suitcases full of like paintings and photos and different curtains. We don't decorate our hotel room, right? We don't spend a lot of time decorating where we're going to be staying for just a week or so, because we're just there temporary. It's just temporary accommodations. And Jesus is saying that our lives should be spent with the realization that this is temporary. It's fleeting. God says our life is like a vapor. It's just like and it's done. It's gone. And so we need to be living with eternity in our minds, thinking about eternity and storing up treasure in heaven. And how do we do that? It's by these things that Jesus has been talking about. By loving God and loving our neighbor. And so we give to those in need. We look for ways to love other people. And Jesus says if we give a cup of water in His name, we won't lose our reward. And then James says that true religion is to care for the widows and the orphans, those that are the least in society. And the other way we do that is by making disciples, right? That's the thing that's really important to us as a church, as Christians, that we make disciples of all nations. That's what we've been commissioned by Jesus to do. And so we address the physical needs and the spiritual needs of those that are hurting, those that are suffering. We seek to meet both those needs. And so we do programs like Clothing Closet and the Food Pantry, and we support people in the community. And we should focus on, in our daily lives, evangelism and discipleship and outreach programs and events that we do. And then also our mission partners. And so we give to do these things because it all belongs to Him anyway. And we want to store up treasures in heaven and not just live for me right now in this moment. And guys, I'll be honest with you, that's hard to do. It's easier to say this stuff than to do it a lot of times, if I'm honest. I think it was Billy Graham that said one of the last things to be converted in a Christian is their pocketbook, their wallet. And he's probably right in that, because we like for things to be about us. We like that. And so what I want us to see this morning, first of all, is that we are accepted because He gave. If we're going to be honest about finances, we don't give to be accepted, period. Jesus has already paid the price. But we do give because He gave. And I hope that makes sense in our minds. Father, we thank You for what You have done for us. God, every blessing that we have. All the things that we take for granted, not just the physical things that we have, material things that we have. Not just our houses and our cars and our jobs, but God, we thank You for our friends. We thank You for our families. And God, all of these things that are good gifts from You. Father, most of all, we thank You for the greatest gift, and that was the gift of Your Son that gave Himself up, that went to the cross to die in our place. God, we thank You for that. And it's always hard to think about giving and what we should give and how we should give. And God, I just pray that You will speak to us, and it's not about a certain percentage or a certain amount, but God, What we need more than anything is for you to put in perspective the difference between living for here and now and the difference and living for eternity. God, help us to store up treasures in heaven. Help us to love other people. God, help us to love you and to follow your example. God, we thank you for these people here. God, I thank you for each family that's here. God, for those that are watching online, those that haven't been able to join us yet, God, I just thank you for what you're doing in your people. And I just pray that you'll continue to bless us and that it won't end there, but we will take that blessing that you bless us with and we'll bless other people. And that will be a light in the darkness that is around us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You guys have a good week, and we'll see you next Sunday.